All right, we're still admitting a few more people in from the waiting room, but my name is James Kernan. We're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you for being with us today. So welcome to the Emerging Leaders Civic Advancement Training Program. Before we really dive into today's agenda, we've got a special guest with us today, and this program was really her brainchild. So I wanted to acknowledge Jennifer Howard is with us. Jennifer is the Director of Outreach Services for McGuire. Many of you hopefully know Jennifer already. So just wanted to have Jennifer say a few things before we get started. Jennifer, go ahead.
Thank you, James. Can everybody hear me okay? Excellent. Well, thank you, James, Allie, as well. Two exceptional leaders we have here to provide training. I've been involved with CFC for many years and have met many of you guys over the years. It's very important to me. Something that I've thought about, wanted to see come to life is, you know, each and every one of you show up, you say yes to volunteering and supporting the combined federal campaign as federal employees, as volunteers. What can we do to give back to you in support of you as federal employees and public service employees? And so acknowledging the ECQs, the Employee Core Qualification Standards that are set in advancing your careers through federal service, we wanted to provide a no-cost leadership program specifically to our CFC volunteers that bring you guys together in a space to really talk beyond CFC, talk about leading change, leading people, building coalitions, all of those things. Ultimately, we realize that it's all connected and that it comes full circle. However, we wanted to provide you guys with a certificate that James will speak to. James and Allie are both incredible leaders that we have been so fortunate to come into in the work of CFC and who they are as professionals. So I'm super grateful to have them at the table to provide you with this training today. And James, Allie, thank you. Thank you for bringing this to light, our first ever Emerging Leaders Civic Advancement Training Program. So I'll turn it back over to you guys, and I'll help man the chat for you.
Great, awesome. Thank you so much, Jen. It's great to be here. So a couple other housekeeping things I'll just share with everyone. Allie and I are going to be the co-host of today's session with Jennifer in support as well. All three of us are going to try to monitor the chat. So I'm also monitoring the waiting room security feature that Zoom has. So that alone, I think, is a full-time task with as many people that we have. So a couple things I wanted to say. First and foremost, if you would please mute yourself. There's quite a few people. We're a little over capacity. We're over our goal, which is fantastic. But if you could mute yourself, we will make this interactive by, there's poll questions that we have. And then when you do want to make a comment or ask a question, go ahead and type that in the chat box. So we'll for sure take advantage of that. And Allie, Jennifer, and I will be monitoring the chats. So please do that. So let's go ahead and get started with some introductions. So my name is James Kernan. I am the zone manager in Heart of the Midlands, Zone 12. Go Huskers, yes, yes. But also I've got a business background. You know, I've published 3 leadership books, you know, bought, sold, owner, ran 7 different technology companies early in my career, had an exit in 2006, and then really formed Kernan Consulting. And we do a lot of leadership and sales training, one-on-one coaching for businesses. And also I run a mastermind peer group community for CEO business owners all around North America. So a fun background there. Allie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
All right, thanks, James. My name is Allie Chang Ray, and I am a co-presenter with James during the series. And my background is quite different from James. While the combined federal campaign is something we have in common, we do have very different backgrounds, which is part of the reason why we are excited to co-present to you, because we think you'll learn a lot from the different perspectives that we bring. So my background is actually nonprofit and also public service. It's public service in terms of nonprofit but I have also been a public servant and working for state government. So while I have never worked for the federal government, I wear that heart in terms of wanting to serve others, whether it is in a nonprofit capacity or a volunteer capacity or working in state government. And my most recent work has also taken me into teaching. And so I have, over the last 5 years, been serving as an adjunct professor at a local university here in St. Louis. So go Cardinals. And so I have been at Washington University and School of Social Work, and in the area that I teach in specifically is fundraising, because from a nonprofit background, I have served as an executive director, so I have raised millions of dollars. I have also I have worked in philanthropy as a program officer for a private foundation, so I have given away millions of dollars. But I also did that when I worked for the state government. There were federal pass-through dollars that came through the AmeriCorps program, and so I was responsible for helping to disperse those funds as well. So I can raise money, spend money, and give money away. Just ask my husband. And so I'm really excited to be able to be with all of you today to join my knowledge with James and present to you how we think your leadership skills can really benefit the world around you, particularly in the nonprofit sector through the Combined Federal Campaign.
Great, thank you. All right. So why don't you go into today's agenda?
All right, so I think I have the next few slides here, so you're just going to hear from me for a bit, but then James will be joining us a little bit later, and he will certainly be chiming in, he and Jen as well. We hope that you do too, whether it be through the chat box or there'll be some opportunities for you to tell us a little bit who you are through a Zoom poll. So we are going through our official welcome. So as Jennifer said, this is the very first time we have ever offered anything like this before. So we're very excited to be able to bring this content to you. Jen has told you a little bit about what the brainchild was for this program. James and I have had a chance to tell a little bit about ourselves, but we're going to give you the chance to do that too in just a few seconds. I'm going to go into the program overview after we have you chime in on the Zoom poll so we get a better idea of who's online with us today. And then I'm going to take the next piece and focus on what we're calling civic participation, give you a very brief history on what that looks like but for our society, and then kind of giving you a little preview for what you'll see on Thursday, where, as you know, this class is twice a week. And so I'll be leading that discussion primarily on Thursdays. So I'm going to give James most of the time today. And then James will go right into leadership development. So he's going to bring you through some key principles that he wants you to understand. We'll be able to bring those pieces together on Thursday for you, and then we'll wrap up. It's going to be a quick hour and a half. So next slide, please, James. All right, so now as we've done the spoiler alert, we told you we were going to do a Zoom poll. James is going to open up a Zoom poll in just a second. I believe there's just a handful of questions, but we want to know who's online with us. You all represent all different parts of the country, and so we're looking to see who's able to join us this afternoon. So go ahead with your computer if you want to just answer the questions as you get them, and then once you're finished, just press the submit button.
So for those of you that can't see the screen, if you maybe have dialed in on the phone, it's what time zone do you work in? Just trying to understand where we're at around the country. One, how many years have you been a federal employee? And then secondly, how many years have you been involved in the CFC?
Right, so make sure you scroll down. There is a third question.
All right, so we're about 70% there. Okay. All right. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to end the polling, and then we'll go ahead and just share the results. Can you see that, Allie?
I can. So the results are in. So for the first question, what time zone do you work in? There is an overwhelming number of you who represent Central. Mm-hmm. So 89% made up the Central time zone. In second place, but far second place, is the Eastern time zone at 9%, and then we have 2% in Mountain.
Right.
Interesting. All right, the next question is, how many years have you been a federal employee? So overwhelmingly, the category with 67% is more than 10. Congratulations. In second place, but again, a far second place behind, less than 5, 22%. And then 11% of you who responded were or have been working with the federal government for 5 to 10 years.
Great.
All right, and then the final question.
Whoops.
Final question went away.
Here we go. Sorry about that.
That's all right. The final question is, how many years have you been involved with the CFC? At 33%, 2020 is my first one. So that's really interesting. Okay, a third of you, this is your first time joining us on the journey. So welcome. In second place then, and a very close second place at 29%, 2 to 5 years. In third place, more than I can count. Wow, so there's some real veterans with the group, so that's very good to know. And then not far behind then at 18% is 5 to 10 years. So interesting. So we're weighted heavily on 2020 is my first one, pretty solidly on the 2 to 5 years, right? And then I'm interested, I hope the ones more than I can count that we hear from you over the next 5 weeks. Yeah. All right, and then as James invited, if you weren't able to participate in the poll because you could not see it, et cetera, we invite you to respond to the questions in the chat box so we can get a sense of what you have, the area, time zone, how many years you've worked in government, and your CFC participation as well.
Great.
Okay, great. Thanks for doing that. All right, James, next one. All right, so we call this the 5-week challenge, and so we've divided this into Mondays and Thursdays. So for the next 5 weeks, we will be together twice a week. On Mondays, then, you'll see on week 1, October 5th from 1 to 2:30, so that's today, and we'll be together again on Thursday from 1 to 2. All right, next week is a little bit, we're going to see how many folks are paying attention, but we moved to Tuesday because Monday is a holiday. So we went ahead and scheduled the second week then for Tuesday, same time frame, 1 to 2:30, and we'll be again together on Thursday. If you are able to complete week 1 and 2, you will earn your leadership certification, but we're hoping that that won't be the end and that you will continue on with us because you are an overachiever, and the content that James and I are sharing with you is something that you're finding valuable. And so we actually encourage you and want you, right, to stay with us and earn your mastery certification. And so what that means is it's another 3 weeks of commitment. And so week 3, again, we're back on a Monday schedule, right? Same time, 1 to 2:30. And then on Thursday, again, from 1 to 2. Week 4, we repeat. And then on week 5, we're just going on Monday. There will be no Thursday that week, but we will actually be issuing the certificates. Actually, James will be issuing the certificates on the week 5. And then we'll tell you a little bit more on what our content's going to be for that particular day. But that is the challenge. All right. So the purpose then of this program is that we're wanting to train and cultivate the next generation of federal leaders, right? And we're going to do this in 3 principal areas. We want you all to be grounded in integrity and to be agile. Right? And if you're able to do that, you'll be resilient. We also want you to have the ability to positively influence others. That's very important in the CFC work and also in what's going on in the world around us. And then lastly, to that point, we want you to be civically and socially engaged. Right? So if we're successful in doing this, hopefully you feel like you've advanced in your knowledge on how to do that and your skills after that. Okay, thanks, James. Next slide. And we're going to concentrate particularly on 3 ECQs. And so if you're familiar with the ECQs, you know that there are 5. Because we are just together for 5 weeks, we won't be able to cover all of them in depthly enough, but we will be able to with 3. And so we're really going to focus on leading change, leading people, and building coalitions. All right, next slide, please, James. All right, so this may look familiar to you. As you know, in civil service, right, there's actually a federal employee oath that all of you took. And so we wanted to just put this up in front of you all because, again, if you remember one of the Zoom poll questions you asked, there are many of you who are online with us today who've been working as a civil servant for many, many, many years. And so this oath that we take is something that helps kind of frame how we want to move forward with not only today's session, but the other sessions in weeks 2 through 5. All right, next slide, James. Okay, so we're actually going to center on, for the next few minutes, on civic participation. So if you reflect back on your civic participation, you may say, wow, let me think about that. First of all, what is civic participation? And then you may think about it even more and say, how did it begin? Not only for me, but like, how did our country get interested in this? Right? And then trying to tie it all together to understand why it's important. So in the piece that I'll be covering not only today, but on Thursdays, and then for the rest of the time, I will really focus on this part of your learning. And so we're hoping that once you're able to put all these pieces together, you are already serving as being a change because you work as a civil servant, but we're hoping that you'll be able to see other ways in your life where you can be an even bigger change and really see the combined federal campaign as a great opportunity to do that, because it's not only giving your money, right? Because it is a fundraising campaign, which is your treasure, but your treasure is also your time, right? And then we also know that you have talent, right? So if you are looking at your time, talent, and treasure, these are all things that the combined federal campaign welcomes. Okay. All right. The next slide, please, James. All right. So let's start out with what is civic participation. So we're actually going to focus on civic participation and looking at it from both a formal and an informal perspective. And there are ways where we can do this, what we call episodic, where there's a need and I just do it one time and I may never do it again. And there are times where it becomes more formal, where it's this regular commitment that I do on a regular basis. And we see those in forms of volunteering, participating in individual and group activities, and even voting. Right? So some examples, and this is where we're going to open up the chat because I would love to hear from some of you in terms of your volunteer opportunities. You know, what are some of the ways in which you've volunteered? Right? Either it was a one-time thing or it was many, many, many years doing something. It could have been where you played a leadership role or you didn't. But I'd love to see some of your examples of you volunteering. What have those been in your lives?
Okay, interesting.
All right. Okay, so we're seeing food bank, reading, serving as a coach. Someone served as a Vista, working with senior citizens, working in for the Parent Teacher Association doing fundraising, blood drive, United Way, advocate for foster kids. There's another coach example, the Red Cross. Okay, here's someone who's had various leadership roles in several community organizations. Okay, now we're starting to see some faith-based. Yep, Civil Air Patrol. Seniors again, youth. All right, domestic programs. Yep, perhaps in domestic violence, scouting, food again, Knights of Columbus, faith-based. Yeah, so lots of great examples. Right? Oh, I like this. Christmas and Halloween parties, so seasonal. Okay. Tutoring. All right. Yep. Toy collection, community gardening, volunteering for your child's classroom. Yeah, so there's a wide range here. Tax assistance, yep. So that's probably, Brooke is probably using her skills that she has and being able to help others file their tax returns, right? Who may not have that same skill set, but it's an obligation that all of us as American citizens are need to do annually. All right, wonderful. Okay, well, keep those coming in, but that's a really great sample of just some volunteering opportunities. And even from that, when you saw that, if we break it down to whether you did that as an individual, right, or as you did that as part of a group activity. So the individuals might be where, you know, the folks who talked about volunteering at the food bank, you might have done that on your own, right, and you signed up for a shift. You perhaps worked with others, right, but you didn't do it as a group. There were others doing it, but you decided on your own that was something, that food insecurity was something that was important to you, and you wanted to be able to help feed hungry people, a basic need that all of us, like, we all need to eat. Group activities could have been, I saw some examples of youth sports. I also saw scouting, right? So those are group activities where you may be working with other people, so they may be youth, but you're also working with other adults, right? So in coaching with a youth sport, we know there are usually several coaches, right? And you're typically all parent volunteers. If you are doing something with scouting, again, very similar, right? You are more than one person. There's typically quite a few individuals who are also playing a leadership role for the youth. Someone mentioned community gardening, right? That's also group activity. So whenever there's a community garden, it's many, many gardeners who come in working together, right, for a common goal. And you're working throughout a growing season to be able to, and even after the growing season, to make sure that the land is prepared for the next growing season, right? But these are examples of both formal and informal. A formal activity, when you've got a scouting program, or if you've got a youth sport, those are regular, those are scheduled out months, if not, sometimes years in advance, a couple of years in advance, particularly in scouting, if you're working with folks on badges, right? There's a lot of planning involved with that. And then another civic participation activity then is voting. And it's not just voting in itself, but it is also the activities around that. So it's helping others understand what the community issues are, and then understanding our democratic process, right? And then not only if it's propositions or if it is candidates, but really helping individuals be informed voters, and then encouraging them to not only be registered to vote, but then to cast their vote. And then to understand then what that means when a group of people, right, vote, whether we approve something or we reject something, right? It is the idea of this democratic society. And so that is another idea of civic participation. And the voting is, if you look back to what we're volunteering for and what we're trying to understand, we see issues around us that we want to see a change, right? Sometimes we want the change to be better, and sometimes we want the change because what's going on is bad, and we want to improve it and make it go away, right? So, for example, if you look at, I think about Flint, Michigan a lot. So when the water was such where people did not have clean drinking water, which you think, wow, how is that even possible in the United States of America? But it is, right? There were policies that were in place that led to that community finding themselves in a circumstance that for months, right, that their water was not sanitary and they were not able to drink. And so whether it was folks volunteering, right, so you saw people all across the country start to donate clean water, right, bottles of water to Flint, Michigan. In an individual and group activities, they could have, some folks were not only doing the collection drives, but then they started to get involved with helping to understand how this situation could even have happened in the first place. And as a result of that, moving to the third bullet, you saw some folks then want to activate, right, and make some sort of change so that this doesn't happen again, not only in Flint, but in other communities across the United States. All right, James, next slide, please. Okay, so what are some of the benefits of civic participation? So one thing that we know is that volunteering feels good, right? There's lots and lots of studies that show that there's chemicals in your brain that when you volunteer and you feel good about what you're doing, about giving back, you actually then, that's a self-benefit for yourself. You feel happier, right? You actually are healthier. And that goes to a secondary benefit that's increased health to participants. There's lots of studies that show that. There's also benefits in terms of a group, right? So a group is also, in addition to a person, right, a whole group can benefit from civic participation. So again, the community gardening is a great example of that. And then from a society, so I read, there were some folks in there who worked on literacy, right? It is a benefit to society when we are able to educate the next generation. So learning how to read is fundamental to that. And so our society benefits from that. And then that whole voting piece also benefits our society, but depending on what it is, right, it could also benefit a particular group of people or an individual. So for example, when we look at healthcare, right, it can benefit a group of senior citizens because their health situation looks a little bit different, but the individual senior citizen will also benefit. All right, next slide, please, James.
There we go.
Okay, thank you. All right, so the beginnings of civic participation actually go way, way back. People will say, well, when did we start doing this? And actually, from what we can find, this actually goes back as long as the beginning of time. So, once if you track to see when people first started roaming the earth, humans, right, you saw that even not only in human beings, but you'll see in other species of animals, right, that there has always been this wanting to help others. If you look at animal behavior, if you look at how people have evolved how humans have evolved over time, right? We've always wanted to help each other out, whether that was something, again, as basic as if you look at, when we were hunters and gatherers, apparently we were all hunters and gatherers at one point, but we were not only just hunting and gathering for ourselves, but many times we did it as a group. And part of it was for safety reasons, right? It was just safer to do that together. But we were social from the very, very beginning. And when we're social, we get to know each other and we want to help each other, right? Because we see in someone else ourselves to a certain extent. And so when we look then and how far this goes back and all the different forms, right? In its most simplistic form, we've been doing this since the very beginning. All right, next slide, please, James. Thank you. And there's also, there's something to be said that this is in our DNA. We're just made up this way as well. So if you're familiar with this particular psychologist, his name is Abraham Maslow, but you may have learned if you took a psychology class in your past, Maslow was the person who came up with this idea of hierarchy of needs, right? And so, James, if you'll just advance, I think there's a little animation there. But what Maslow's theory is it tells us is that, thinking about people, right, and human beings is starting from the bottom of the pyramid and working our way up, not only helps us understand why we engage in civic participation, but it also helps us understand then how we make the decisions when we are looking at civic participation on what stands out to us and what means the most to us. And a lot of it has to do with what stage we're in our life. So if you look at this hierarchy of needs, we start at the bottom, where it's just very basic needs, right? So for survival, we need air, food, water, and health. The next level then is safety. The next, and that would go on to shelter, stability, right? Social, the need for love, belonging, inclusion, and we move ourselves up. So what we find, if you think about it, when humans are born, right, we're very basic in terms of we're looking for the physiological and the safety piece, right? And as we get older, so if you think about as your children grow older, they become adolescents. Right. And then even when they're young, in their infant and toddler stage, the need for loving, belonging, and inclusion, right? We see more of that, even more so. And that just continues as we grow older. Right. Then once you go into the ego piece, and you start to see this also when kids become adolescents, right? But they're struggling with that power, the control. But we also, this is something that we continue to face through our entire lives. When you think about what you wanting to be promoted in a position or wanting to, not, some of us are more humble than others, right? But we all still have a level of ego where we're looking for some type of acknowledgement for the work that we've done, even if it's, picking our dishes up from the kitchen table and taking it over to the sink, right? But we're all looking for some sort of recognition of what we are doing. In essence, the contribution, right, that we are making to something. And that's no different than later in life when we're wanting to make sure that even as we get older, I'm still contributing. I may be retired, right? But I still want to contribute to something bigger than myself. And then in the last phase, the self-actualization, this is where, all these other pieces that have built my pyramid are pretty stable, right? But now I'm looking for even furthering myself as an individual. And so we'll talk a little bit more about Maslow on Thursdays, but I wanted to introduce this concept to you. But if you look at the arrow on the far left, right, and you think about then with where you sit right now in your life and looking at what you're volunteering for, what are the issues that matter to you, what are the issues that you've started to become aware of, but you want to learn a little bit, you'll actually find that many of them are centered on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And so what you may find yourself drawn to is you may find yourself in a place where you went through at a time in your life, or you might be even looking at it now, but you recognize it in a group of people or an individual, right? They're struggling with some piece of this in the hierarchy, and that's actually what motivates you and draws you to want to help them. I'll use my husband as an example, right? My husband cannot believe that there's food insecurity in the United States. Can't believe that in a country as prosperous as the United States that we have people who cannot have food on the table, right? So he is always about the food banks. But he's very much in that physiological, basic need sort of thing in terms of food insecurity. And until he feels like that people have that, he is not going to look anywhere else on this hierarchy, right, to help. And not to say that he doesn't recognize that people need help in other ways, but that's what motivates him, because he feels like you need to have the basics before you can build on that and grow as a person and move up the ladder. So, but I encourage you to take a look at this slide before Thursday, reflect on that a little bit, and we'll dig into it a little bit more then. All right, next slide, please, James. All right, so the feeling of compassion is the beginning of humanity. So this just kind of takes me full circle to when we talk about civic participation, right, and where this all started. This Chinese philosopher from, BC, so if he were alive today, he'd be very, very old. But he thought of, this beginning of humanity and tied it to compassion, which I thought was really, really interesting because that is essentially what we've seen humankind do. Next slide. I think this might be my last one. All right, so getting close. So before I transition and start to hand this over to James then, so what the Combined Federal Campaign is doing is really encouraging, in this year's campaign, our theme is to be the face of change, right? And so we want to be able to explore with you over the next few weeks on Mondays, what does it mean to lead during change, right? And James is really going to help guide that conversation. And on Thursdays then, I'm going to help you think about ways that you can be a change maker. And we're going to center this on all the different opportunities that are in front of us, but really looking at activating that through the Combined Federal Campaign. All right. And that is it.
Great. Thanks, Allie. That was fantastic.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So I wanted to dive into let's start talking about leadership right away. What does leadership look like to you? We all have different experiences in life and different upbringings, for example. But think back and feel free to comment in chat if you could. But what does leadership look like? Think back of some of the early leaders or mentors that you had in your life. Who were they? Some of mine, my father was a great business leader. I'm the youngest of 5 kids, so really looked up to my father and my oldest brother. So those were both mentors and great leaders in my life. My father had some successful businesses. I also played sports my entire life, baseball, football, wrestling, you name it, I played it. So some great coaches were involved as well from a leadership standpoint that I can think back that I learned a great deal from. So one of the quick examples I wanted to share, so I played college football. I think I was a sophomore coming into my junior year, and some of the upperclassmen had graduated. So I remember the coach in summer camp coming up into my junior year, came up at one of the early practices and said, "Hey, I really need some of you guys to step up. I need you to be leaders, and I need your help. So you guys need to take it up a notch." And I remember going home that afternoon before the next practice, and I was thinking to myself, I go, what really does leadership look like? Now, it's a little bit different based on whether you're on a football team or running a campaign for the Combined Federal Campaign for your office, or whether you're driving revenue for a corporation. So it's all a little bit different, but there's a lot of similarities. And in this instance, for me, what it meant like on the football field was I needed to be more vocal. I needed to get out front. I needed to cheerlead and encourage and inspire some of my teammates to work harder. So I used my God-given gifts of enthusiasm and started cheerleading and encouraging and doing that, and subsequently was elected captain the next couple of years. So that was for me a great example of what that looked like early on. So let's talk about the difference between a boss or a leader. Some of you may have seen some of these graphics out on the internet before, or the difference between a manager and a leader. And it's very different, okay? So I wanted to highlight this a little bit. So a boss drives employees, but a leader coaches employees. A boss depends on authority, but a leader depends on goodwill. So a boss inspires fear, right? A leader generates enthusiasm. A boss says I, but a leader says we. A boss places blame on the breakdown, will call you out in public, and the leader fixes the breakdown. And I've always believed, praise in public and scold in private. So that would be something to jot down in your notes. I think that's really important. A boss knows how it's done. A leader shows how it's done, from a training standpoint. A boss uses people, a leader develops people. A boss takes credit, a leader gives credit. A boss commands, but a leader asks. Okay, asks and listens. And a boss says go, and a leader says let's go. So I thought this was interesting to share as well. Success, what people don't really see about success. Everybody thinks it's fairy tales and unicorns and rainbows, and you win these trophies and make lots of money and get all this recognition. But what people don't see and they don't think about is the hard work that goes into it, the discipline, the skills development, like you here today are developing your leadership skills. Meeting targets, staying healthy, creating good habits, having that all important growth mindset and believing that you can make a difference and believe that you can be the face of change. That's so important in making sacrifice. Sometimes it's hard work. So remember that when the chips are down, just keep going and persevere, and success is right around the corner. So I believe there's 4 requirements of being a leader. I want to talk about these 4 real quick. So number 1, vision. Vision's important. The old saying, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So for me, with all my years of business experience, and I've worked with hundreds of business owners in 6 different countries as well. And also this is my 4th year in the Combined Federal Campaign. And I love that work, by the way. But everything starts with a vision. So you got to create your goals, your 1-page campaign plan, right? And you need to share that vision in writing with the rest of your volunteers or the rest of your team. So the campaign in your office is just like running a business where you've got to create your goals, your unique selling proposition. What's your purpose? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And then what's your strategy? How are you going to get there? But it's important. A lot of people keep that vision up in their head, but you won't inspire teamwork until you put it in writing and connect your people to what the vision is. Decision making. So you have to be decisive. You have to make decisions and not be afraid of failing. Make decisions and charge forward. If your coworkers constantly are like, hey, let me think about that and I'll get back with you. That's not really a good sign for me. That's a little bit of a red flag. So don't be afraid to make decisions. You have to make decisions in order to make progress. Okay, so just think of it that way. Responsibility. So responsibility is an interesting one as well. It's not just me taking responsibility for my actions, but as a leader, I have to take responsibility for my team's actions. So let me tell you a real quick story. One of the businesses that I was running was a company called Networks Plus out of San Diego. So we're growing very rapidly. And I always wanted to create a culture, a fun environment where employees were inspired to stay at work because they had so much fun. I decided early on that we had a nice office, but I got a portable basketball hoop, got a grill, and we had cookouts. We did burgers and beers and just kind of had fun, played basketball every Friday afternoon, about 3 o'clock. Okay, so we had some of our strategic partners that would come and some customers that would come over, but basically people would still hang out at the office until early Friday evening. But it was a great way to build camaraderie and really build that positive culture that I was working on. Well, unfortunately for me, one of those Fridays, one of the marketing coordinators came up in my office in tears and said that somebody playing basketball was hustling, chasing the ball, and they ran into her car and put a big dent in the car. And I was like, oh boy, yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sure he'll take care of it. And she said, no. The gentleman said that we need to file an insurance claim for the building, or this employee needs to file a claim against her insurance policy. I remember thinking to myself, I go, that's not taking responsibility for your own actions. And I remember I said, let me help with this. So I sat down at my desk and I was getting ready to email the president of the company that this other gentleman worked for that ran into the car that did this. And I remember thinking to myself, I go, okay, how am I going to word this? This is a real sticky situation. So I sent an email and said, hey, here's what happened. Here's what we're doing. And your employee said that it wasn't their responsibility. And I said, my analogy would be like my child was playing baseball in the neighbor's backyard and they hit a line drive and broke the window. And then when you came out to say, hey, you need to fix my window, I said, no, you need to file a claim. And that, needless to say, that was probably the quickest response on an email I'd ever gotten. But that's they took care of it and took care of her immediately. So it was a little awkward with this other gentleman, but the reality is they did the right thing and they took responsibility for their own actions. So remember that. That's what real team leaders do. The other thing I wanted to say, the fourth one, is being out front. And sometimes it's a little hard. We'll talk about communication and public speaking and so forth, but being out front normally means leading, setting the vision, communicating, and sometimes it's public speaking or running your group meetings. And that's not always natural for everybody. But I think it's important, and whether you run your meetings on Zoom, you run your meetings face to face, it's important to constantly communicate like that and be the one who is communicating and leading. Okay. So some additional leadership requirements, being encouraging. I talked a little bit about that. Inspire trust. You want to build that camaraderie and that trusting relationship. I'll talk more about that in just a little bit. Instructing and managing and mentoring. So in many cases, Allie, we had a lot of very diverse experience of people that worked for years and years in the federal government. And there's also a lot of people that have years and years of experience inside the federal campaign. So use that experience and mentor this next generation, and use your enthusiasm and your God-given gifts to keep them inspired and mentor them to be the best that they can be. So here's something might be something to get out the notepad again and just jot this down. This is something I want to share with you that, to me, in all the years of coaching and leading, it's really a foundation of motivating and leading employees. I'll date myself a little bit. It's an old Ken Blanchard book. I read it years and years ago, but I don't know, feel free to go ahead and raise your hand in your video window or comment yes in chat. But for those of you that read The 1 Minute Manager, but a great, great book. And the golden nugget that really stuck out to me in that book was this. It's really a 3-step process. Number one, when you create your goals and expectations, do it in writing. So you need to set goals and expectations in writing. Sometimes people fail by just verbally saying, hey, I need this, here's what the goal is, and you verbalize it. I think it's important to put it in writing and verbalize it, okay? Number two, you need to train your employees to meet and exceed your goals and expectations. This is an area that I see most people really struggle with. It's easy to set goals and expectations and then hold people accountable, but it's a little harder to put together a training program to help develop them. So it's our responsibility as leaders to train our employees to meet and exceed the expectations and what their goals are. And then the third part is hold employees accountable. So accountability isn't negative to me. All it is really communication. And the beautiful thing is if you do the first two right, then the third part's really easy. It just naturally happens. And again, accountability is just communication. You're just letting them know how you're doing. And whether you have a high-tech office or a low-tech office, some people have goals and so forth, maybe listed up on digital signage in their office or these cool dashboards or some kind of fancy report that comes out. I like that kind of transparency where you're over communicating how people are doing and how the team's performing. I love that. Just like your campaigns, I want to make sure that we're all getting your performance, your pledge numbers and the number of donors out to you as often as you ask. So make sure you connect with your zone managers and do that. But communication is really important. And again, accountability doesn't have to be negative. A lot of people think accountability negative. That's not it at all. To me, it's the opposite. It needs to be positive. You heard me say a moment ago, praise in public and scold in private. I don't think I've ever met anybody that enjoys to get yelled at and humiliated in front of their peers. Have you ever met anybody like that? Because I sure haven't. Frankly, it's harmful. I think it's hurtful for the culture and morale of people. So obviously, I'm more of a positive personality. So I'd rather encourage you to, on a positive way. Everybody loves hearing a public compliment about themselves, or they magically grow a third ear in a conversation where they hear somebody behind them talking about them, right? So try to use that, praise in public and scold in private. And then the last part is recognition. So you want to reinforce those good behaviors. So whether it's a compensation plan, whether it's a bonus plan, whether it's just verbal recognition, everybody likes hearing positive things and reinforcing that good behavior. And don't wait for the end of the year review before you say something that they did back in January. Try to make it immediate. I think that's really important. Okay. So Allie, I'm going to dive into the interpersonal skills. So this is another one of the components inside the ECQs that we wanted to talk about, from a people standpoint. So the 6 type of skills, the interpersonal skills that I want to talk about today: number 1, communication; number 2, conflict management; 3, empathy; 4, listening; 5, negotiation; and then 6, positive attitude. And I just talked about that a little bit. So I'll go through these a little quicker. But the first one, from a communication standpoint, the reality is being able to effectively communicate is really one of the most important interpersonal skills in any job. And there's different types of communication. There's verbal communication, like I'm sharing with you right now. So that's kind of a common sense one. But there's other ones I wanted to elaborate on. Nonverbal communication. So what does nonverbal mean? So what I'm speaking of in this instance is things like eye contact, hand gestures. A lot of people speak with their hands. I do as well. It's your body language, are you sitting up, your posture, is the energy, or you turned. If I'm communicating with you, I want to look at you right in the eye. I don't want to be looking over here and saying something to the person over here. It seems so common sense, but it's so important. In all my years of sales, it's one of the things I feel like I'm really, really strong and really good at. One of my favorite things to do is sit in a sales pitch meeting and be not the one talking, but the one listening and watching. And I love watching body language of how people react with the things that we say. So nonverbal cues are really, really important. Okay, so remember that. You don't want to be closed off. You don't want to be looking down. You just want good eye contact. So public speaking skills, that's an important one as well. So the public speaking, I can tell you some funny stories about that, because early in my career, I was terrified about public speaking. And fortunately for me, the companies, I had leadership positions, and the companies I worked with or had grew quickly, and we had lots of employees. But the part I wanted to say is, it takes time, it takes practice. One of the things you might want to jot down in your notes is, if you haven't done it before and you want to be a better salesperson or have stronger influence over people or better communicator, take a Toastmasters class. Go to toastmasters.org. Toastmasters.org. It's you can look up the local chapters. It's really an international organization, but it's fantastic. It's a group of people just like you that want to be better speakers. Some have more natural talents than others, but the reality is you're going to become a much better speaker by practicing. And it's a fun, safe environment that you can practice being a public speaker. So I'd encourage you to do that. I think that's really important. And another one is visual communication. And what I mean by visual is more of like graphics, like the PowerPoint slides that we're presenting from. It could be, if I'm presenting numbers, it could be some spreadsheets, but it's more of a visual representation, graphics, for example, of graphic cues. So you can communicate. And a lot of people are visual learners. So certainly in one-to-many communications, or if it's important, in any case, whether it's a group or one-on-one, I think visual cues are really important as well. And conflict management is the next one I want to talk about. So some of our other classes coming up in the future weeks, we're going to talk more about conflict management, but I wanted to just comment on it briefly because it was part of this. But the ability to really listen and deal with conflict, whether it's you with someone else, or even maybe more frequently, it's 2 other people that are having some type of disagreement. I think it's really important that you're fair and that you show empathy, and that you listen and use your problem solving skills to try to help come up with some type of fair resolution. I just encourage people to always be professional, never take things personal or attack people personally. But the key word I'll use in this and it's the same way with some of these other the core leadership that I'll talk about, is I'll use the word fair. As long as they're being fair with one another, or someone's being fair with me, then I'm going to be a pretty good listener and we'll be able to effectively get things resolved. But if I feel like people are not being fair and they're being unreasonable, then it makes it a little bit more challenging. So try to use that maybe as a rule of thumb to help you out. But again, we'll talk more about conflict management in a later session. Okay. So number 3 is empathy. It's part of being a good leader is really the ability to understand and show empathy towards one another. It's a super important skill inside the workplace. You know, I know my businesses, I had some small number of employees and some very large number of employees, but I always had an open door policy. If somebody needed to say something, they could always come in and do that. But you want to show that you're caring, that you're compassionate, and that you're listening. Okay, listening is really, really, really important. So let me just jump into listening, and it's really a skill to me that goes hand in hand with good communication. I could be a good speaker, but communication's two-way street. So I'm pushing a message out, but that other person's not really understanding it. And so listening to me is really a full understanding of the message going back and forth. And here's something I'll just share that's kind of funny. I'll be transparent, and many of you have spouses on the training session, so feel free to poke at me and chat and laugh about it. But true story, you know, it's hard for me being a consultant. You know, people pay me for my advice, and so I'm happily married and have 2 wonderful young boys. And my wife would come home, and she frequently would maybe explain what a challenging day she had, and she was upset about this or upset about that. And finally, one day I wised up and I said, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And she went, "Sure." And I said, "You know, do you want me to help solve the problem, or do you want me to listen? What would you like me to do?" And it was kind of game changing for me, and it's kind of funny. What do you think she said? Right. She basically said, "I want you to listen." You know, 99% of the time, people just want to be heard and acknowledged. You know, it's typically one of the number 1 reasons why employees become unhappy in their office is because they don't feel like they're respected or acknowledged or heard in their office. So listening is really, really important. So please do that. So negotiation, again, to me is very similar to conflict management or problem solving. It's another really important skill in many positions. So I just wanted to highlight that really quick, but same type of thing where you want to sit down and use your problem solving skills and arrive at an outcome that's a win-win. It's a positive outcome for both parties. You typically, you know, might feel good if you get a lopsided victory your way, but the other person's going to realize that and resent that. So again, I'm back to one of my favorite words I'll say is fair. I want you to be fair with one another. And I think that's an important piece of leadership. So you want it to be a win-win. And another important piece is, in order for it to be a win-win, it takes a little background research on your side. You really need to understand what the other party is looking for. What do they really want? What's their hidden agenda? And if you have visibility to and have a stronger understanding of where they're coming from, it's going to be a lot easier for you to have a successful negotiation and make it a win. Okay. So the next one and final one, I've talked a little bit about this already, is the power of a positive attitude. I think that's really important, especially if you're running a campaign in your office. You want to come up and be negative. You know, people will listen to you and they'll donate and give you time and maybe donate to a charity that relates to a cause that you're talking about, if it's someone that trusts you. You know, that's the number 1 reason why people donate, is because someone they trust asks them. So it's important that you're smiling, you're saying thank you, you're being gracious, very grateful. So I was always the kind of person that I wanted to work with someone that if I had an opportunity or I had a task, I want to work with a person that, hey, here's 5 ways we can get that done, James. Not the person like, the negative Nelly that says, oh, here are the 5 reasons why we can't do that, James. It's just never going to work. And for me, I always like looking, at figuring out in a positive way how we could get things done and hit the goals that we need to do. So here's something, maybe a little homework for you to just think about. And I encourage you to try it because it's a lot harder than it sounds. But it's going to be kind of funny me just saying this, but there's 2 things I want you to think about, maybe jot down in your notes. Number 1, never admit that you're tired, angry, or bored in the office. Okay, just try that. Just try it for 1 day. Okay, ideally try it for the whole week. But think about that. How often do you maybe complain about something or admit that you're tired or if anybody ever told me they're bored, I said, well, only boring people get bored. If you're bored, pick up a broom and go clean the warehouse. Let's go. We got tons of things to do. So in a positive way, try not to do that because you're projecting that positivity and you're going to help lift other people. Okay, so never admit you're tired, angry, or bored. The other one to think about is just try giving 3 different people genuine compliments. Okay, genuine compliments. You can't be phony about it. Hey, Terry, that's a sharp tie. That's really cool. Just try to do that in any one given day. It's interesting what the world kind of subconsciously teaches us. It feels like it's all negative and it's a beat down every day. And it's kind of funny if you cut someone down or someone else cuts someone down and then you're still in the room and you laugh. I would encourage you to be the opposite. Be that face of change and be the one who gives people compliments. Okay. The reality is employers want to make the workplace brighter. They want your employability and your ability to move up in the organization. In my professional opinion, is far greater if you lead with positivity and you're easy to work with. And it'll make work, I think, a lot more enjoyable as well. Okay. All right. So here's something else on a positive attitude. How many of you read this book? It's another old book, but it's one of the books I read just after I got out of college. I thought it was fantastic. It's called The Greatest Salesman in the World. So it's a book from Og Mandino. And one of the key nuggets I just want to share about this is really the power of positivity. And the comment or the question really is who's man's best friend? We all know who man's best friend is, right? It's a dog. And I remember, and I had a dog at the time when I was reading this book, and it stuck with me. It just stuck in my spirit. And I remember reading it and I was very convicted because what came to me was yesterday when I left for work, the dog had chewed up my glasses and I scolded it and punished it and I felt really bad. But later that day, when I came home for lunch, the dog was at the front door. And when I opened the door to come in, it was so excited to see me. It just was genuinely excited and filled with all this positive energy. It had completely forgotten that I scolded it 4 hours ago. But it was that unconditional love. And it clicked with me early in my career that, hey, I want to be the one who walks in the room and brightens that room. And again, use my talents to help people feel better instead of being someone who's negative that brings the energy down in the room. And it's all about energy. It's a positive energy. So if you haven't read that book, I encourage you to check it out. It's a great read. So a little bit more on oral communication. So oral communication, really, it's the combination of both speaking ability and listening capacity. And whether you're speaking one-on-one with someone or you're doing a one-to-many or a group presentation, I think it's really important. And something I'll share, something my father told me a long time ago, he always said the smartest person in the room was the one who listens. Not the one who's speaking, it's the one who's listening, okay? And one little tip as well, if you're in a meeting, a good effective listener writes things down, okay? Because what you're telling the other person is what they're saying is important to you. It's important enough for you to write it down, okay? So write things down, take notes, and it's also a great way to remember the conversation and track your action items and so forth, okay? So let's talk a little bit about integrity. So here's the the Cambridge English Dictionary definition of integrity, the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. Okay, so to me, integrity is doing the right thing when no one's looking. You may have heard that before, but here's a couple interesting points about integrity. And so moral principles, they vary from person to person. So people have different value systems and beliefs, and you need to understand that up front. So I may have different value or moral principles based on my upbringing or my community or what I do for a profession, and maybe the 5 people I surround myself and spend the most time with. So I think it's important to kind of understand whatever your values are, whatever your upbringing is. To me, it's important that your personal understand what they are and then live true to those values, live that out. Okay, so define your core values and live them out. One of the things I mentioned earlier was one of the very first of the 4 requirements of leadership is vision, and it's really creating your plan. So part of that plan that I always like discussing and elaborating on is what your core values are. And typically the core values of a company or an office or a project really is a mere reflection of the leadership's core values. Okay, normally there's a direct correlation. So I wanted to share that with you. So here's something else real quick about integrity that I think is really important. It's another thing I'm going to ask you to jot down because it's that important. So keep your verbal commitments. Okay, if you say that you're going to do something, do it. How many of you, maybe with a show of hands or jot down in chat, how many work with someone who says they're going to do something and then they don't? You know, it's probably one of the biggest struggles that we have in any office environment is maybe a lack of accountability or people that just aren't getting things done after they say they're going to do it. And I want to share a little process with you, a 4-step process that I think is really important. This is something I learned early in my career, and it really helped me because I was a little bit of a, very enthusiastic, I have lots of positivity, but I also was a little bit of a yes man, where I was a people pleaser and I always wanted to make people happy. So if somebody invited me to go do something, I'd say yes. And if somebody asked me to go do something, I'd say yes. And I constantly was saying yes to everything, but I wasn't really paying attention to, and then I would miss deadlines and I wouldn't get things done. And it started really bothering me, and it bothered my spirit. And then here's the 4-step process I just want to share with you because I think it's really, really important. If we all did this, if everybody did this in the world, tomorrow is going to be a better place, I promise you. But really important, first and foremost, when someone asks something of you, think before you make a commitment. So be quick to listen and slow to speak. I think that's really important. Do I have the resources to get it done? Do I have the time to get it done? Do I have the skills to get this done? Is this something I can delegate to a team member and still follow through and make sure that it gets done? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, then don't commit or make a longer deadline. But it's really important, just be quick to listen and slow to speak when it comes to verbal commitments, because it's really important. Write it down so you don't forget. That's number 2. Okay, write it down so you don't forget. And to me, one of the most important pieces is number 3, renegotiate if needed. So if I promise you that I'm going to be in a meeting in downtown Omaha at 10 o'clock, and I know in advance it's going to be a 30-minute drive from where I live, and I'm leaving at 9:45, mathematically, I'm going to be late. I'm probably going to be about 15 minutes late if I'm lucky. So I know in advance if I'm not going to get it done, right? So what I'm saying is renegotiate the deadline. So at 9:45 or 9:30 or how earlier the better. You can't renegotiate after the deadline. You have to renegotiate before the deadline. That's really important, okay? And it sounds so simple, but just follow those steps and it's going to help you immensely. And then the 4th one is just get it done and follow through. Make sure that you get it done and communicate to the person that you got it done before the deadline. I had years of sales experience, and I remember I started doing this, and it was really important. There would be proposals. Hey, I'll get this proposal to you by 5 o'clock. And I'd look at my watch, and I had like 6 proposals to do, and it's like, 4:30. Like, I'm not going to get these done. So I just would prioritize those. And every time I picked up the phone and I called the person and renegotiated, hey, can I get this to you tomorrow mid-morning? Will that work for you? Yeah, absolutely. And the trust that you have with the other person is going to grow immensely. And to me, what's just as important, or maybe even more important, is yourself. You hear yourself making these commitments, and if you don't follow through on them, it's going to erode your confidence. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more, kind of coming down the home stretch. I want to talk about continuous learning. So it's really the process of learning new skills and knowledge on an ongoing basis. So it's, I've always aspired to be a lifelong learner. We've got many of you are here because you want to learn new leadership skills. You want to learn more about the campaign and more about this program. So I applaud that, because you're lifetime learners as well, and I appreciate that. But when you do that, you renew your self-motivation. You'll realize and recognize your personal goals and your interests. You'll sharpen your professional skills, improve your self-confidence, and more importantly, you'll find your purpose. Okay, that's so important. So let's talk a little bit more about public service motivation and servant heart leadership, because I think that's an important part of leadership. Let me see, Allie, I'm going to see if I can launch. I'm going to see if I can launch this other poll, and it doesn't look like it will let me. Whoops. But I just wanted to learn a little bit more about the public service motivation, the poll question, and if you could, just go ahead and answer it in chat. The question really is, have you served in any leadership positions, either in your office or in your community, from a volunteer standpoint? I just want to know what your level of service participation and motivation is, because I want to talk about that a little bit. So those of you that have access to chat, go ahead and put in your answers, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, there we go. Having trouble with my slides. So from a public service motivation, it's really an attribute of government and non-government organizations. It's really the desire to serve the public and link your personal actions with the overall interest of the public. To me, it's more of like a servant-hearted leadership where you're putting others' needs before your own. And to me, it's an important thing. And to be honest and transparent, I had kind of a life-changing event when I was about 40 years old and sold my company. And there was a book I read called Halftime. And I love sports and love football. And this was an analogy of the first half of your life was all about, your get into the best school you can, get the best job you can, find the best spouse that you can, raise your children the best you can, and really advance your career the best you can. And then the second half of your life, what are you going to do? And to me, the kind of the moral of that story was really about giving back to other people. What's the legacy that I want to leave? And encourage you to kind of think the same. You wouldn't be working in the government unless you had that servant's heart. And I admire that, because I had opportunities to work in the government and didn't. The government was one of my biggest customers for a number of years when I sold technology, and I worked with some great people. But that's what's so awesome for me, to work inside the campaign. So when I sold my business back in 2006, what really shifted for me is I realized I want to help other people. It's not about me anymore. It's about helping other people. So I think that's important. To me, that's really what my why was. I realized at that time that I wanted to help other people not give up. I wanted to help them create plans. I wanted to help them get better, make their life better, whatever the problem was they're having. In many business cases, it was, not enough sales or not a good marketing plan, or we didn't have goals. To me, those things were easy to fix, but get those people back on course of what their purpose was all about. so they could help reward their family or be more fulfilled as an individual. And that's one of my favorite questions to ask if I'm ever speaking at maybe a CFC event is, what's your why? Why do you do what you do? You know, why are you a public servant? Why do you work in the combined federal campaign? And so start with your why, and the conversation will be a lot different than you think. Okay. And to me, it's very much about being a servant heart leader, you know, and being a servant heart leader is leading by example, being humble but confident. You put the other's interests ahead of your own. One of our LFCC chairs in Heart of the Midlands in Zone 12 is Terry Morgan. Many of you know who Terry Morgan is. Terry has a different leadership tagline on his email signature line. I don't know, at least every week it seems like it's different. And one of the ones that stuck out to me that he had was, leaders eat last. Okay, that's a true servant heart leader quote right there. Leaders eat last. They take care of the others first. And that's what I encourage you to do, is put others' needs first before your own. Okay. And kind of closing it in together, here's a great quote that I want to share. You know, individually we are one drop, but together we are an ocean. You know, Jennifer mentioned earlier, you know, many hands makes light work. It's really the power of teamwork and camaraderie. But this one kind of pulls it together a little bit more. And because to me, the ocean is so powerful. And each of us think, well, I can't make a difference in the world, or I can't make a difference. You know, I haven't honed in or sharpened my leadership skills. I'm not capable of making a change. Yes, you are. Because when you come together with lots of people in a unified fashion, you know, together we're an ocean. So here's the acronym I wanted to share with everybody about unity. So you uplift one another with encouragement. We talked about the power of encouragement. N is the need for one another because we're better together. I intensely relate to one another by better understanding others. Okay, the power of listening and understanding where they're coming from. What's their why? Okay. T is trust one another, and Y, yield to one another, learn to delegate and share responsibility. Okay. So, Allie, that's it. Let's go ahead and kind of wrap up. That was the content that we wanted to share with you. So thank you for listening, and thank you for your feedback. Kind of in review, just to recap, we talked about civic participation. Allie led that first 20 minutes of content and did a great job. So thank you for that. And then leadership development. And that was what I had just been sharing for the remainder of our time today. So next steps, Allie, that I just wanted to highlight, just a friendly reminder. So we've got a community-based discussion. There'll be more interactive discussion next time. So Thursday, October 8th at 1 p.m. We're going to have a 1-hour meeting, or slightly less potentially, but we'll probably use the whole time. But that will be starting at 1 o'clock Central Standard Time on the same Zoom link that you have. So same Zoom link. So log back in on Thursday at 1 o'clock. We're going to break out in discussion groups, and we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the content and how to apply what we talked about today. Allie, did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about for Thursday's session?
I just want to clarify something for Thursdays. I was reading some of the emails from this morning, because I was at a CFC training this morning and was not able to keep up with emails, but I took a glance, and there were a couple of folks who mentioned that there was a Thursday session canceled. And so I just want to clarify that. I'll put that in Friday's, the weekly email summary as well. But I had made a mistake. I had actually sent 2 calendar invitations for the same Thursday discussion. So the cancellation you saw was for the duplicate. But there are 4 Thursdays, as we talked about at the beginning of today's session when we gave the program overview. But the cancellation is a duplicate that I created by mistake.
Okay, so just to clarify, we are meeting on Thursday. So we're meeting at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. This will be more of the interactive discussion. And again, we're going to talk as a group. And then we're going to break into individual discussion groups as well for a short period of time. So highly encourage you to join us. And to me, that's where the rubber meets the road. All of this is great to kind of learn new skills, but unless you apply it, to me, it's worthless. So the Thursdays are the fun part of what we're teaching, okay? So I encourage you to check that out. And then Allie just mentioned as well, Friday, Allie's going to send out an email first thing in the morning. It's our weekly email summary. Moving forward, you hopefully saw one on Thursday, but I'm sorry, on Friday. But this Friday, you'll see kind of a quick recap of what we talked about. It'll be a copy of next Monday's workbook and what we're going to talk about for next time. Okay. And Allie, I think that's it. That's going to be a wrap. So here's our contact information. There's my email address and phone number if anybody has any questions. We'd love to hear your feedback. Tell us what you like, what you dislike, what you want more of. But that's our contact information. And we appreciate you all being here today. We've got about another 12 minutes. So we got a couple minutes still we can give back to everybody. But does anybody have any questions at this point in time?
James, there was a question in the chat box from Matt Copel, who's coming to us from Rock Island. Welcome, Matt. Glad you could join us, regarding when the recordings would be made available.
Great, awesome. The recording should be available within 24 hours of this. So we are recording all the sessions. We're going to upload these and we'll send this email out to maybe on our Friday emails. We'll give you the links to the YouTube channel, but all the trainings will be recorded and you'll be able to get the trainings and the workbooks up on the YouTube channel. Okay, thank you for that. Okay.
James, I'd like to add, because you talked about how feedback is really important to us. So agreed. We have a formal evaluation that we'll be doing at the very end. So that won't be coming until after the 1st of November, because our last session together is November 2nd. So if you have some feedback, though, for us in the meantime, we're very attuned to that. So as James said, please feel free to reach out to us. We don't need to wait till the very end because we won't be able to make any changes. So please let us know if you have ideas for improvement.
You got it. Great. Awesome, everybody. It looks like we've answered everyone's questions. Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll see you on Thursday. Okay. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Allie. Great job.
You also, James.
Thank you.